The fourth anniversary passed all too quietly late last month. The death by friendly fire of Army Ranger and NFL star Pat Tillman. Our third story on the countdown, it was newsman Bo Carter in the 30s who insisted that in war, truth is the first casualty. In Mr. Bush's wars, obviously, it multiplies. Pat Tillman's mother has been told so many different versions of the truth, while the government tried to twist her son's death into a recruitment tool. And she has now chronicled her ordeal, an ordeal greater even than solely a son's death, in a new book. Mary Tillman joins me in a moment. Pat Tillman, of course, left football's Arizona Cardinals to enlist in the Army after 9/11. On April 22, 2004, he was killed in a canyon in Afghanistan. And the Army told his family and the world that he died while charging the enemy after his unit had been ambushed. At that time, the Abu Ghraib prison scandal was exploding. The Bush administration needed a distraction. President Bush presented a Silver Star to the Tillman family for his service, but 5 weeks after his death, the Army reported finally that he'd actually died by friendly fire. And even now, after 7 military investigations and 2 congressional hearings, full accountability is lacking. Joining me now as promised, Mary Tillman, author of Boots on the Ground by Dusk, my tribute to Pat Tillman. Great, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Have you settled in your mind what has happened or what happened to your own son? Obviously, it was friendly fire, not that the government wanted you to know that or wanted us to know that. But are you certain at this point that it was accidental?
I'm pretty certain that it was accidental. I mean, I think there was gross negligence involved in it. I think the soldiers, rather than being in a fog of war, were in a less to shoot, a less to fight. And I think they should have had more serious consequences. But in order to do that, there would have to have been an inquiry that probably would have caused the officers in the Tactical Command Center or Tactical Operations Center to be questioned, and their orders would have been put into question, and I don't think anyone wanted that.
The other sort of conclusive question, have you settled this one in your mind? Who's responsible for the cover-up, and what punishment should they face? And is it still possible for any of that to happen?
Well, I think that the cover-up probably started with the former Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. In terms of a punishment, that's really not for me to say, but he should be held accountable for that. And if there are others that were involved in that, they also should have a consequence. Pat was in the former Secretary of Defense's radar. He had written Pat a letter when after he enlisted, thanking him for enlisting. And our family learned at the second congressional hearing last summer that Rumsfeld wrote a P4 memo to the then Deputy Secretary of the Army, Peter Guerin, who is now the Secretary of the Army. And his email indicated that, Pat was a very special individual and that, they should keep an eye on him. So it's ludicrous to think that once Pat was killed, no one told Donald Rumsfeld.
Would the powers that be, whether it was Rumsfeld or somebody lower on the food chain, would they have kept that cover-up going indefinitely if they could have gotten away with it, do you think?
I believe they would have, but the coroner and the medical examiner could tell that when Pat's body came in that he was not killed by the enemy. They were suspicious of his wounds because the wound pattern could not have been caused by an AK-47. And the fact that Pat's brother Kevin was in the same platoon, and eventually the soldiers in that platoon would probably talk to him and tell him.
Do you think, is there still a chance of getting all the answers to this? I mean, has all the evidence been destroyed? Has the entire chain of evidence been corrupted for all time? Is there any way to get at a final truth other than what you think you can build up from the drips and drabs you've been given?
I think all the physical evidence has been destroyed. I mean, I don't think there's anything left in terms of that. Everything now would be, testimony. So I don't think that, there's much that can be done in that regard. But I do think that Congress should be looking harder at who is responsible for the cover-up. I think it's really important for people to understand that this deception was not just a deception to our family. This was a public deception. This story was concocted in order to rally patriotism for the war and to deflect the horrible month of April 2004. With Abu Ghraib and Fallujah and the president's dismal approval rating and all the casualties in Iraq at that time.
Last point, Mary, has this, in summing this up for the purposes of a book, did it lead you into any insights about the society we live in that people should know, that they should hear from you directly?
Well, I feel that, the public needs to pay close attention to what is happening with, the government. The soldiers, when they enlist, they know going in that they could die, they could be wounded, they could be damaged, mentally or emotionally. But they don't expect their government and the military in which they serve to disrespect that service by lying to their families when they die. And I think that soldiers lose their voice when they enlist. My son spoke of that before they did enlist, that would be a reality. And the public is their voice. And if the public is not vigilant and paying attention to what the government is doing, it's very dangerous.
And what you described there is how we might best yet honor Pat Tillman. Mary Tillman, author of
I think so, yes.
Boots on the Ground by Dusk, my tribute to Pat Tillman. Thank you for sharing something so, and I don't mean just in terms of the interview or the book, but your whole involvement of the public in this. Thank you for sharing it with us. Our very best wishes to you and to the family.
Thank you for having me.